I used to believe that love was about sacrifice, that if you gave enough, if you endured enough, everything would balance out in the end. But love isn't measured by endurance. And I was slowly realizing that Rebecca wasn't just a demanding wife, she was a cruel one. While you're here, leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to know. For the last 5 years, I had stayed home to raise our 2 children while Rebecca built her career in finance. It wasn't what we had originally planned. I had a degree in marketing and had worked in corporate strategy before we agreed that it would be best for the family if one of us stayed home. She had the higher-paying job, and I had always been good with the kids. It made sense at the time. But somewhere along the way, my role as father turned into something she viewed as lesser. "Keith, you wouldn't understand," she would say at dinner parties when the conversation turned to business. "You spend your day with finger paints and naptime schedules, not corporate contracts." It was always a joke, always a little dig, always just enough for the room to laugh while I forced a tight smile and swallowed whatever pride I had left. The worst part? People believed her. At first, I had tried to brush it off. But the problem with small humiliations is that they add up. A single drop of water doesn't break rock, but constant erosion? It carves canyons. The turning point came at Rebecca's parents' house. It was a Sunday dinner tradition, one we rarely missed. The kids were in the backyard playing while the adults sat around the table, drinking wine and catching up. Rebecca was in her element, holding court, laughing loudly, and making sure everyone at the table knew how indispensable she was at work. "You wouldn't believe the mess I had to fix this week," she said, swirling her wine. "One of my team members completely botched a client proposal. I swear, sometimes I feel like I'm the only competent one in the room." Her mother, an elegant woman who had never quite approved of our arrangement, smirked. "That's why you're in charge, darling. Not everyone can handle pressure like you can." Rebecca sighed dramatically. "Honestly, I come home, and it's like I have to turn off half my brain. Keith tries, bless him, but sometimes I think he forgets how the real world works." The other day, he was actually stressed about which brand of organic snacks to buy for the kids. Laughter erupted around the table. My throat tightened. "Hey, Rebecca," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Remind me again, who makes sure our kids get to school, doctor's appointments, playdates? Who handles their homework, their meals, their daily routines?" She raised an eyebrow, as if she had just noticed I was there. "Keith, come on. No one's saying what you do isn't important." I set my fork down, my jaw clenched. "It sounds like that's exactly what you're saying." The laughter died. A beat of silence passed, and for the first time in years, I saw something flicker across Rebecca's face, something that looked like annoyance. Her father cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "So, Keith, have you thought about getting back into work? Maybe something part-time?" There it was. The real question. I looked at Rebecca. She held my gaze for a second, then casually reached for her wine. It hit me then. She didn't respect me. Maybe she never had. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending I didn't see it. I told myself I was overreacting, that the dinner at Rebecca's parents' house wasn't as bad as I was making it out to be, that I was just tired. But the thing about realizations is that once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. And now, I couldn't stop noticing every little way Rebecca dismissed me. The way she looked past me when I spoke, like I was background noise. The way she barely acknowledged what I did for our home and kids. The way she thrived in the role of the powerful executive with the clueless husband. A few weeks later, we had dinner plans with Nick and Julia, old friends from college. People who had known us before the shift, before Rebecca's success had turned her into something unrecognizable. I was looking forward to it. Julia had always been kind, and Nick was the type of guy who actually listened when you spoke. It would be a normal night. Except with Rebecca, normal never lasted. We met at a trendy new restaurant downtown, the kind with minimalist decor and overpriced cocktails. The conversation started light, kids, vacations, reminiscing about college. Then, as it always did, it drifted toward careers. Julia smiled at me. "So, Keith, how's it going at home?" I always say stay-at-home parents have the toughest job. I opened my mouth to respond, but Rebecca cut in before I could. "Oh, he's great with the kids," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I honestly don't know how he doesn't go crazy being home all day. I'd lose my mind if my world revolved around laundry and snack schedules." I forced a smile. It's more than just snacks, Rebecca. She laughed. I know, she said, taking a sip of her wine. But come on, Keith, let's be honest. It's not exactly hard. Nick glanced at me, shifting uncomfortably. Julia's smile faded. They heard it too. Something inside me snapped. You're right, Rebecca, I said, setting my fork down. It's not hard. It's just a constant, never-ending job that keeps two small humans alive, while also making sure the house doesn't fall apart, while also being expected to act like it's nothing. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp, calculating. Keith, don't make this a thing. I let out a humorless laugh. Oh, I wouldn't dare. That might make you uncomfortable. Can't have that, right? Silence. The kind that changes things. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She was used to me being passive, used to me swallowing my words. But not tonight. Nick cleared his throat. So, Julia and I were actually just talking about how tough it is balancing everything. Julia works from home now, and honestly, it's a full-time job just managing the household. Exactly, Julia added. I don't know what we'd do without Nick helping out, especially with the kids' school stuff. Rebecca smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Well, Keith's always been great with that. He just doesn't. She stopped herself, like she had caught the insult a second too late. I didn't let her off the hook. Doesn't what? Work? Contribute? Have a real job? Rebecca's face flushed. Julia shifted in her seat, looking between us, clearly regretting bringing up the topic. Nick just looked at his drink. Rebecca sighed, shaking her head. Why are you being so sensitive? You know I appreciate what you do. I exhaled slowly, willing myself not to explode. No, Rebecca. You tolerate what I do. You act like it's some hobby, like I'm just playing house while you go out and do the real work. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you handled anything at home? When was the last time you did bath time, or packed lunches, or helped with school projects? She shifted in her seat. Keith, that's not. No, let's be fair here. I do the cooking, the cleaning, the grocery shopping, the laundry. I handle the bills, the kids' appointments, the school schedules. You know what I don't do? Belittle you for having a career. More silence. Julia, bless her, tried to change the subject. So, I heard the school's doing a fall carnival this year. Are the kids excited? I let it go, but the damage was done. Rebecca was furious. I could feel it in the way she gripped her wine glass, the way she didn't speak to me the entire car ride home. She stared out the window, arms crossed, exuding pure, icy rage. Finally, as we pulled into the driveway, she let out a sharp breath. That was humiliating. I put the car in park and turned to her. Yeah, it was. Her head snapped toward me. What the hell has gotten into you? I stared at her for a long moment. I'm just tired, Rebecca. Tired of being a joke to my own wife. She scoffed. Oh my God, Keith. It was just banter. You're overreacting. I shook my head, gripping the steering wheel. No, I'm not. I've just finally stopped pretending that it doesn't bother me. She rolled her eyes and got out of the car, slamming the door behind her. I sat there for a moment, staring straight ahead. Something between us had cracked, and I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. The shift between Rebecca and me wasn't immediate. It wasn't an explosion, a screaming match, or a dramatic moment of realization. It was slow, a gradual unraveling of something that had already been worn thin. After the dinner with Nick and Julia, she became distant, not in the way of someone angry, but in the way of someone disinterested. She stopped making small talk, stopped asking about my day, stopped pretending she cared about anything happening in our home. Instead, she threw herself deeper into work, staying later at the office, taking more calls that required privacy. At first, I chalked it up to her career. Rebecca had always been ambitious, and she had been gunning for a promotion for months. But something didn't sit right. Something felt off. Then, one day, I found the box. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The kids were at school, and I was cleaning up, the way I always did. Rebecca had left in a rush that morning, barely looking at me as she grabbed her coffee and headed out the door. I was in our bedroom, folding laundry, when I noticed one of her dresser drawers wasn't fully shut. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. But the way it was cracked open, just enough to show something tucked inside, a sleek, unfamiliar box, made me pause. I shouldn't look. That was my first thought. This isn't who you are, Keith. But my second thought, you already know something is wrong. I reached for it, heart pounding, fingers brushing against smooth, high-end packaging. I pulled it out and opened the lid. Inside was a watch. A men's watch. Expensive. Sleek. Not mine. A sharp chill ran down my spine. I stared at it, waiting for my brain to make sense of it, waiting for a reasonable explanation to appear. But there wasn't one. There was no reason Rebecca would have an expensive men's watch hidden in her drawer, unless it was for someone else. I sat down on the edge of the bed, gripping the box so tightly my knuckles turned white. A dull ringing filled my ears as my mind raced. Could it be a gift? A present for a friend? A family member? Someone at work? But if that were the case, why hide it? Why not mention it? Why keep it tucked away in a drawer like a secret? I exhaled slowly, forcing my hands to steady. Jumping to conclusions wouldn't help me. I needed to be sure. That night, I watched her. I watched the way she barely looked at me when she walked in the door. I watched the way she smiled at her phone, the way she tucked it away when she saw me looking. Long day? I asked, my voice calm, measured. She nodded distractedly, dropping her purse onto the counter. Yeah, work is insane right now. Big contract coming up. Just trying to make sure everything goes smoothly. I studied her, waiting for some flicker of guilt, some hesitation. Must be important if you're pulling so many late nights. She shrugged, pouring herself a glass of wine. You know how it is. These things take time. A lie. A clean, effortless lie. And I knew it then. Rebecca was cheating on me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, but instead of breaking me, it cleared my mind. This wasn't about a single watch or a few late nights. It was about a pattern. The way she treated me. The way she dismissed me. The way she no longer saw me as her husband, but as something to endure. She didn't love me anymore. Maybe she never had. But here's the thing. I wasn't going to act on impulse. I wasn't going to blow up, demand answers, let her twist the narrative into something where I was the unreasonable one. No, I was going to get proof. I was going to gather every piece of evidence I needed. I was going to make sure that when I confronted her, when I finally exposed the truth, there would be no escape. That night, as Rebecca sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I made a quiet decision. She thought she was untouchable. She thought I would always be the passive, loyal husband, too blind to see what was right in front of him. But she was wrong. I was done being blind. And the next time she looked at me, she wouldn't see a clueless fool. She'd see the man who was about to burn her perfect little world to the ground. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the truth settle over me like a crushing force. Rebecca was cheating on me. I didn't know for how long or how deep it went, but I knew enough to see what I had refused to acknowledge for months. The way she dismissed me, the way she barely looked at me anymore, the way she carved out parts of her life that I was never allowed to see. She had already left me. She just hadn't bothered to tell me yet. But she didn't know that I knew. And that gave me an advantage. By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront her with nothing but suspicions. I wasn't going to let her gaslight me into believing I was paranoid or insecure. No, I needed proof. Concrete, undeniable evidence that would leave her no room to twist the story in her favor. I started with her phone. Not by going through it. That would be too obvious. But by paying attention. I noticed how she always kept it face down, how she took her calls in another room, how she suddenly started locking it when she never had before. That alone told me she had something to hide. So I ordered a GPS tracker online. Small, discreet, magnetic, easy to slip under the bumper of her car without her ever knowing. It arrived in 2 days, and that night, while she was in the shower, I stepped outside and secured it in place. When I walked back in, I heard her humming from the bathroom, oblivious, carefree. She had no idea her secret was already falling apart. The next day, I started tracking her movements. She had told me she was working late. The GPS told a different story. She left the office around 6:30 and drove across town. Not home, not to a client meeting, but to a hotel. I stared at my phone screen, watching the little blinking dot sit there for an hour and a half before moving again. Then she drove home, walking through the front door like nothing had happened. Long day? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She sighed, kicking off her heels. You have no idea. Meetings ran late. Just nonstop stress. I nodded, forcing a smile. Sounds exhausting. She smiled back, kissed my cheek like she had done 1,000 times before. But now, I knew the truth. And that kiss felt like poison. Over the next week, I gathered more. More hotel visits. More late nights that weren't really late nights. Then, I went further. I set up a dummy email account and reached out to someone I knew worked in the mailroom at her firm, an old friend from college, someone who owed me a favor. I kept the message simple. Hey man, weird question, but have you ever seen Rebecca with a guy named Grant? His response came within minutes. Grant, the senior VP? Yeah, man, they're always together. Heard some rumors, but I didn't want to assume. Why? Something up? I stared at the screen, heart pounding. A name. A confirmation. The final piece came when my friend sent me something unexpected. Security footage. It wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough. A grainy black and white clip of Rebecca and Grant leaving the emergency stairwell of her office building, clothes slightly rumpled, hair out of place. That was it. I had her. And now, it was time for the real plan. One thing about Rebecca, she thrived on appearances. Her career was everything. Her reputation was everything. The image of being the brilliant, ambitious executive who had everything under control was her greatest strength. So what would happen if that image shattered? I set up a meeting invitation under a fake alias, posing as a family-friendly business consultant. Sent it directly to her work email with a warm, professional message. Rebecca, we are thrilled to invite you to a special Family Day presentation at your office, celebrating the balance between work and home life. As an esteemed leader in your company, your presence is greatly valued. Please join us for an exclusive segment honoring employees who exemplify dedication both in the workplace and at home. I made sure to copy her boss. She accepted immediately. The morning of the meeting, I walked into the office building, greeted by staff who assumed I was just another guest. I carried a flash drive in my pocket, containing a carefully prepared presentation. The room was packed, executives, managers, employees eager to see the showcase of their firm's values. Rebecca sat in the front row, unaware. She spotted me as I took the stage, confusion flickering across her face. Good morning, I said, my voice steady. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to appreciate the hard-working individuals who dedicate themselves not just to this company, but to their families. Work-life balance is a key to success, and today, we celebrate those who exemplify that ideal. I clicked the first slide. A generic corporate message filled the screen. A few heads nodded. Rebecca relaxed. I clicked again. The screen glitched. Then, grainy security footage appeared. Rebecca and Grant. The stairwell. The disheveled hair. The subtle touches. The undeniable proof of what they had done. A collective gasp. Rebecca's face went pale. The CEO, seated 2 rows back, leaned forward, his expression dark. Grant stiffened, looking like he wanted to sink into the floor. I turned to Rebecca, my voice calm. Would you like to explain? She couldn't speak. Silence filled the room. I let it hang there for a moment. Let her feel the weight of it. Let her watch her career, her reputation, her perfect little life crumble in front of her colleagues. Then, I stepped away from the podium and walked out the door. Rebecca had spent years undermining me. Now, I had returned the favor. I walked out of that conference room and didn't look back. But even as I stepped into the elevator, even as the doors closed and the hum of dissent filled the air, I could still hear the silence I had left behind. A silence that spoke of shock, humiliation, and the irreversible destruction of Rebecca's perfect image. I wasn't even out of the building before my phone started buzzing. First a call, then another, then a flood of texts. Rebecca. I let them come, one after the other, the sheer desperation vibrating through the screen. Keith, what the hell did you do? Pick up the phone. We need to talk. Come back right now. You don't understand what you've done. Oh, I understood perfectly. I stepped outside, inhaling the crisp air, feeling lighter than I had in years. My marriage had been a slow, suffocating weight pressing down on me, and now, the pressure was gone. Rebecca had spent years controlling the narrative, making me feel like I was less. But now the truth was out, and there was no taking it back. The phone kept ringing. I ignored it. I wasn't interested in hearing whatever desperate excuse she was scrambling to put together. She had spent months, maybe longer, building her lie. Now, she could sit in the ruins of it. But Rebecca wasn't one to accept defeat. By the time I got home, she was already there, pacing the living room, still in her office attire. Except now, the blazer was gone, her hair was a mess, and the carefully put-together confidence she always carried was cracking. The second I stepped through the door, she turned to me, eyes blazing. "You think you're clever?" She snapped. "You think humiliating me in front of my colleagues was some kind of justice?" I dropped my keys onto the counter, unbothered. I think it was long overdue. She let out a bitter laugh. "You're such a child, Keith. A vindictive, petty child. You had a problem, and instead of talking to me, you what? You set up some public spectacle? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I exposed you," I said simply. "That's what I did." She shook her head, hands clenched at her sides. "I was handling things, Keith. I was working through my own feelings, and you just threw everything away." I arched an eyebrow. "Oh, you were handling things? That's what we're calling sneaking off to hotels with Grant now? That's what we're calling humiliating your husband in front of our friends, our family, and anyone who would listen?" Her mouth opened, then shut. For once, she had no excuse. She took a deep breath, composing herself, switching gears. "Keith, listen. We can fix this. I messed up, okay? I made a mistake. But we've built a life together. We have kids. Don't throw everything away because of one bad decision." I stared at her. "One bad decision?" I let out a dry laugh. "Rebecca, this wasn't a decision. It was a series of them. Repeatedly. You don't just trip and fall into an affair. You don't just wake up in a stairwell with your coworker by accident." She swallowed hard, but she wasn't done fighting. "You're being emotional. You're blowing this out of proportion. That did it." The last shred of patience I had left snapped. "Emotional?" I repeated, stepping forward. "You spent years tearing me down, making me feel like I wasn't enough. Like staying home with our kids made me lesser. You got off on making me the joke in every conversation, every dinner party. And the whole time, you were the one with something to hide." She flinched. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice steady, cold. "We're done. I've already contacted a lawyer. The paperwork will be filed by the end of the week." Her expression flickered, shock, then panic. "Keith, don't do this. We can go to therapy. We can work through this." I shook my head. "No, we can't. You didn't just cheat on me, Rebecca. You broke everything. And I have no interest in fixing something that should have never been destroyed in the first place." She stepped closer, her voice softer now, desperate. "You don't mean that. Think about the kids." That hit a nerve. "The kids?" I repeated, my jaw clenching. "You want to talk about them now? Where were they when you were lying to their father? Where were they when you were sneaking off, pretending to be working late? You don't get to use them as a shield now, Rebecca. That's not going to save you." Tears welled in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. For the first time in our marriage, she had no control. She let out a shaky breath. "You don't have to do this." I already did. I turned away, heading upstairs. I heard her sharp inhale, the way she struggled for words. But there was nothing left to say. Rebecca had always thought of herself as untouchable, always assumed that she could control everything, manipulate every outcome, talk her way out of any situation. But this time, she lost, and I had never felt stronger. Rebecca didn't leave that night. She should have. But instead, she paced the house like a caged animal, barely holding herself together, muttering under her breath like she was rehearsing some last-ditch argument that might undo everything. But there was no undoing it. She tried again the next morning. I had just finished making breakfast for the kids when she walked into the kitchen, her hair still a mess from what I assumed was a sleepless night. I barely looked at her as I handed our daughter her plate, but Rebecca wasn't about to let me ignore her. "Keith, can we talk?" Her voice was quieter now, less sharp, less defensive. Calculated. I didn't answer right away. I focused on the kids, making sure they were settled. I wasn't about to let them see the fight brewing beneath the surface. Once they were distracted with their food, I finally turned to her. "We've said everything that needs to be said." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Not with them here. Please. Just 5 minutes." I exhaled slowly, set down my coffee, and walked past her into the living room. I could feel her hesitation before she followed. She shut the door behind us, as if closing us off from the rest of the world would somehow change what had already been done. She folded her arms, staring at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. I don't understand how you can just throw us away like this. I let out a sharp laugh. That's rich, coming from you. She flinched. I made a mistake. No, Rebecca. You made choices. Over and over again. And now you don't like the consequences. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Do you even love me anymore? I met her gaze, and for the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel a shred of doubt in my answer. I don't even know who you are anymore. Her face crumpled for half a second before she caught herself, swallowing hard, blinking back whatever emotion had almost slipped through the cracks. Then, just as quickly, the Rebecca I knew resurfaced. The one who always had an angle, always looking for leverage. You're angry, she said, her tone shifting, carefully measured. And I get that. But Keith, think about the kids. Do you really want them to grow up in a broken home? I clenched my jaw. You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat. She let out a frustrated breath, running a hand through her hair. I told you, I wasn't thinking. It didn't mean anything. It was stress, it was bad judgment, but it wasn't. It wasn't what? I cut in, my voice low. It wasn't real? It wasn't serious? It wasn't important enough to destroy our family, but just important enough to risk it anyway? She stared at me, struggling for words. I gave her a second to find them, but when nothing came, I sighed. I'm done with this conversation. I'm done, period. She stepped forward, desperate now. Keith, don't do this. We have a life together. We have history. You can't just throw that away because of one mistake. I shook my head. You keep saying one mistake like it was some fluke accident. Like you tripped and fell into an affair. It wasn't one mistake. It was months of lies. It was humiliating me for years. It was making me feel like I wasn't enough, like I wasn't a real man, while you were out there with him. She was breathing fast now, fingers curling into fists at her sides. I can't believe you're doing this to me. I blinked. To you? Yes. She snapped, her composure slipping completely now. You think you're some kind of hero because you embarrassed me? Because you exposed me in front of my entire company? You don't even care about fixing this. You just wanted revenge. Maybe I did, I admitted. Maybe after everything you've put me through, after every time you made me feel like less than a man, less than a partner, I wanted to see you squirm for once. Maybe I wanted you to finally feel as small as you made me feel. Her face turned red. You think you're better than me? No, I said, my voice steady. I just think I deserve better than this. She was shaking now, her nails digging into her arms, breathing uneven. You'll regret this, she whispered. You'll wake up one day and realize that you destroyed our family. I exhaled slowly, stepping back toward the door. No, Rebecca. I'll wake up and realize that I finally saved myself. She didn't follow me as I left the room. She didn't say another word when I walked past her, grabbed my keys, and stepped out into the fresh air. And for the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I was walking away. Rebecca didn't take the divorce well. I expected anger, denial, maybe even some dramatic grand gesture to win me back. But what I got was strategy. She wasn't interested in saving the marriage. She was interested in saving face. The moment I filed the papers, the real fight began. I had assumed she would go quietly, accept the inevitable, and try to move on. I was wrong. Rebecca didn't lose. Not in business, not in her career, and certainly not in the image she had carefully crafted for herself. And if she was going down, she was determined to drag me with her. The first sign came when I received an email from my lawyer, Ryan. I had barely finished my morning coffee when my phone buzzed with his message. She's contesting. Brace yourself. I set the mug down, exhaling slowly. I wasn't surprised, just disappointed. She could have taken the easy route, signed the papers, and let us both move on. Instead, she was gearing up for war. A week later, I sat in Ryan's office, reviewing her demands. He slid the document across the desk, watching me carefully. She wants primary custody of the kids, a significant portion of your shared assets, and she's claiming emotional distress. I stared at the paper, the words blurring together. She cheated on me. And she's the one claiming emotional distress? Ryan smirked, leaning back in his chair. It's classic. If she can paint you as unstable, unfit, or emotionally vindictive, she gains leverage. She knows how the system works. She's betting on you folding. I let out a slow breath. I'm not folding. Good, he said, nodding. Because I've already prepared a counterattack. I glanced up. What kind of counterattack? He slid another folder toward me. Undeniable proof of infidelity. The security footage. The GPS records. The text logs she forgot to delete from her work email. I flipped through the pages, my stomach tightening. This wasn't just proof. This was a case. Every lie she had told, every excuse she had made, was now documented. Ryan continued, his tone calm but firm. The courts don't care about morality, Keith. They care about evidence. And what we have here, it's enough to swing this heavily in your favor. The moment she realizes that, she's going to panic. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. What do I do? Nothing, he said simply. Let me handle it. She thinks she can play this like a business deal. She doesn't realize she's already lost. And he was right. A week later, we had our first legal meeting. It was held in a sleek conference room at Rebecca's firm, a neutral location, as if that somehow made the situation less volatile. She sat across from me, dressed sharply, her expression controlled, her lawyer whispering in her ear. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the tight grip on her pen. She was nervous. Ryan started. Let's be clear. Our client, Keith, has been nothing but cooperative. He has provided stability for their children, maintained the household, and remained respectful throughout this process. He is seeking a fair division of assets and shared custody. However, he paused, tapping the folder in front of him. If this goes to trial, we will be forced to present evidence of infidelity, including security footage, digital communication, and GPS tracking data. Rebecca's lawyer stiffened. She didn't react, not outwardly, but I saw it. The brief flicker of panic in her eyes. Ryan leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. If this evidence is introduced in court, it will become public record, which means your firm will have access to it. Your colleagues, the media, should they take interest. If you believe this is in your best interest, we can proceed to trial. Silence. Rebecca's lawyer glanced at her, waiting for direction. She swallowed, her fingers tightening around her pen. I want a revised agreement, she said finally. Her voice was low, clipped, controlled. 50-50 custody. Fair division of assets. No alimony. Her lawyer flinched slightly. She was conceding. She had no choice. Ryan nodded, sliding the new paperwork toward her. Sign today, and we won't pursue additional damages. Rebecca's hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. She hesitated, then finally, she signed. And just like that, it was over. She stood abruptly, gathering her things, her composure cracking at the edges. I hope this was worth it, she muttered under her breath. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. It was. She scoffed, turning sharply and walking out the door. Ryan let out a slow breath, closing the folder. Well, that was satisfying. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. It should be. So why don't I feel better? Ryan shrugged. Because you're a decent person. You didn't want a war. You just wanted the truth. But people like Rebecca? They don't go down without making you feel like you're the villain. I nodded slowly. Yeah, but at least now, I'm a free villain. He grinned. Damn right. And with that, I stepped out of the office and into the rest of my life. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting to hold something together. I was finally letting go. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.